So it's very much in its infancy of what it can be, and we're constantly working on that. So first off, I want to thank Aquashella for having us here, and the Fish Tube people for doing some awesome fundraisers with us. This has been a really great opportunity to see people. So let's get down to how tiny fish are preserving ecosystems. So the IUCN is an international union of scientists who work on developing sustainable things. They're the people who come up with like red lists for endangered species and stuff like that. So we are recommended by them, we're supported by them, not financially, but we're supported by them in that they like what we do. And so this project has lots of huge cascading effects in terms of habitat conservation, climate change, poverty alleviation, because you can't take any one of the pieces separately. They're all linked together. You can't preserve the habitat while you have people cutting down the rainforest to feed their families, and you can't have the fish if they're cutting down the rainforest, because then the fish don't do so well when you have all these catastrophic environmental things going on where they come from. So who keeps home aquariums? Who keeps an aquarium at home? Who keeps more than one aquarium at home? Who keeps more than 10 aquariums at home? So it's a big industry, right? It's something that we all love. Obviously, we're here at Aquashella. It's an awesome place. So home aquariums, actually, for a long time, people have thought of it as just something in your living room, but it's not. It is, of course, something in your living room, but it is also something, those fish came from somewhere, right? And if you think about fisheries, we're going to circle back to this, where these fish came from. Sustainability is defined as the ability to be sustained, supported, upheld, confirmed, environmental science, not being harmful, right? So basically, the definition of sustainability is don't screw something up, right, with your activities, with what you do. So my question for you is, are fisheries sustainable? So at the New England Aquarium, we do a lot of work with food fish fisheries, like cod and haddock and stripers and things like that, ground fish. New England is like well known for its fisheries and seafood. So the long answer is it really depends on the fishery. We have this matrix of, does it destroy the environment? Are the fish populations sustainable? Does fishing for them remove too many of them from the environment? Lots of things like that. And the short answer really is it depends on the fishery. It's constantly changing. It depends on how the fish are caught, where the fish are caught. All of these things go into it, right? And there's a huge difference between wild-caught fish and captive-bred fish. So just by a show of hands, before I've really told you anything about our project, how many of you think that a wild-caught fish is better for the environment than a captive-raised fish? You guys can't cheat because I talked to you already. How many of you think wild-caught is good for the environment? Okay, maybe. How many of you think captive-raised is good for the environment? A fish that's raised in a tank. Okay, maybe, right? I'm going to tell you, it depends on the fish, right? So a million years ago, I worked at PetSmart, and people would come in and they would say, oh, I really want to keep a fish tank, but I don't want my fish to have been taken from its home, right? And they have this really, you can't think about the fish as just being this, thing. It's an animal, right? It had a life, right? It had, fish friends and fish babies and things like that, right? But more than sustainability, if you want to think about your fish as being sustainable, we want to do better than just not screwing it up, right? We want to make it better. We want to actually have a net beneficial impact on the fishery. So let's get into the Rio Negro, where we're going to talk. This is the poster child of Project Piaba. So this can be extrapolated to other places like, the Congo or anywhere in like Southeast Asia, or anywhere where you have lots of resources but not a lot of cash, not a lot of ways to make a living for your family. So the Rio Negro is in the middle of Brazil. It is the largest tributary of the Amazon. It's a fantastic place, right? I like puns. It's a hotspot for biodiversity. It's a huge carbon sink. It's a place where there are a lot of trees. It's a place where if you cut down that rainforest, they call the Amazon the lungs of the world. If you cut down that rainforest, it would release so much carbon into the atmosphere that it has catastrophic effects for climate change, right? We're here to talk about fish, not climate change. But I can tell you that it is related. It is hugely related, right? If this area gets slash and burn farming, whoa. that's bad. There's endemic species. There are fish that are found here that are found nowhere else, and they're all really cool. There's medicinal plants. There's things that people who are living in these areas know about plants that scientists and doctors and people don't even slightly understand. There's so much cool stuff. There's birds, there's frogs, there's giant river otters, which are terrifying. There's all kinds of bugs. There's butterflies, there's tarantulas, I like bugs too. Giant river, or pink river dolphins, and my favorite, there's fish. There's a lot of really colorful fish. So disclaimer, these are not all fish from the Rio Negro. These are just all fish that I have kept at one time. But there are a lot of the Rio Negro species that we work with specifically here. So again, you can't understand the fish and the benefit that the fishery have to the environment without understanding a little bit about the place. So here's what it looks like. It's the Rio Negro, it's black water, right? So it's this really huge area where the water sort of filtrates through the soil and takes on a lot of the tannic properties from the soil. It's really dark water, it's really acidic. And there are really lots of cool fish that live there. There's not a whole lot of food in that area. Like, it all falls out of the trees in the rainforest, right? So there's not a lot of the fish populations are miniaturized. There's a lot of really cool little fish that we call piabas that come out of that area. Actually, we don't call them piabas. The people that live there call them piabas. So we took their name and put it on our shirts. It's Project Piaba, right? So there is a huge seasonal variation in that area. This photo up here is a village called Himansu. This is like just as the dry season is starting to end, and that's about 40 feet from where the river is to up to the houses. And in a particularly wet, rainy season, those houses are underwater. There were like lines on them from like 5 years prior that had like, people live in these, they sleep in these hammocks that they hang in their houses. You can't even put it on the floor because there's water on the floor, right? And they're all up on stilts and they're all up on that bank. So it's a huge seasonal variation. So what happens when you have that seasonal variation, what it means for the fish is that there is a huge difference in where the fish live in the rainy season to in the dry season, right? So the water level goes up about 40 feet, right? And then you've got fish that can literally swim in the rainforest, right? They're swimming amongst the trees. They're eating all of the stuff that's in the rainforest. They're eating the berries, they're eating the leaves, they're eating the bugs that fall out of the trees, they're eating all kinds of stuff, right? And what do fish do when you give them lots of really good sources of food and lots more space than they used to have? What do? Babies, 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 right? They go nuts. So they breed like crazy. And then the water level goes back down in the dry season, and you end up with the river receding into its main channel. And then you've got all these little pools and pockets of water where the fish kind of get trapped in the rainforest. What happens to a fish that's trapped in a drying up puddle? It's dead, right? It's dead. Either the fish dies or it gets eaten by a kingfisher or something like that. Or you have somebody come along and catch it, right? So when we talk about carrying capacity, this is a scientific term that means like basically how many of a certain thing you can have in a space and still have them survive and thrive. I like to think about it with Oreos, right? I did this is a side story here. I did a project where I worked for Audubon for a while, and we were living on this island and in the lighthouse with 6 scientists who were bird people. We were all, ornithologists. And so we're living on this lighthouse, and somebody brought a box of Oreos with them. And six bird scientists in a lighthouse, and 1 box of Oreos was not enough, right? So we started rationing out the Oreos. Everybody got like 5 to start with, right? And then you would like save your Oreos and then trade them. Like, I don't want to wash dishes tonight, I'll give you 1 Oreo. And somebody would be like, I'll wash all 6 people's dishes. Yeah, give me that cookie, right? So carrying capacity is really, when we think about it in terms of fish, it's kind of like this, right? You can have like how many fish you can keep in your tank and how many fish you can't keep in your tank, right? So it's important when that, those fish, when they have those babies, right? It's very different. So the biology that plays into this too, because people ask, are fisheries sustainable? Remember that question from way beginning in the presentation? Are they sustainable? I'm going to tell you it really depends. We have R and K selected species, right? The R selected ones are the ones that are really small. They, make lots of babies. They make their babies fast. They make their babies early in life. Things like that. The K selected ones are generally your bigger animals. They live longer. They get to be like 20 years old before they have their babies, right? So what does this mean? You have your cockroaches, right? That, they're everywhere. They breed like crazy. You can't get rid of them. And then you have your elephants, which, take decades before they have babies, and it takes decades to raise them. That happens with fish too, right? You have your cardinal tetras that, are produced quickly and easily and are very, inexhaustible. And then you have your longer lived fishes that are maybe a little bit less, you can't catch as many of them without impacting the fishery. So again, we're based in New England, right? So we think a lot about fisheries. When you think of fisheries, you think of something like this. You've got your commercial trawlers and your seiners and when you think of the home aquarium fishery, a lot of people think about all those environmentally catastrophic things like dynamite fishing on coral reefs and like cyanide fishing, right? I'm here to tell you that Project Piaba fish, the fish that come from the Amazon, are incredibly different type of fishery, right? It's not a commercial trawler. There's no dynamite involved. There's no poison involved. It's a bunch of dudes in a canoe with the net, right? And the net looks like this. This is a mini one that there's this little kid that lives in the village of Daraqua that made this for my friend. And so I'm really proud to have it. I love it. It's the miniature version. The real one is about my size, and there's a picture of it right there. So they go out, and these people who have been fishing for forever in these areas really understand the fish. They know what they do. They know how they do it, and they can like pick the leader cardinal tetra, right? So they go out in this little canoe to this little spot in flooded forest, and they find a fish that they think is in charge, and they like kind of scoot it with a canoe paddle like into the net, and then scoop it, and then they scoop it and put it into their canoe. That's kind of different than dynamite fishing, right? That's kind of different than commercial trawling. If they catch a fish that they don't want, they toss it back where they caught it. It's not like bycatch where you've got like your barn door skates that are driven nearly to extinction by being bycaught, right? They're just returned to the environment. It's very gentle, it's very low impact. And then they take those fish after they catch them, they hold them in these little pens before they ship them further downriver to Manaus, and everything is done by boat there. It's all, the boat is like the highway, the river is the highway, and the boats go up and down and take all the fish and the supplies and everything there. You can't get there by road. You can't. And then they're held in these export facilities, and then they're packaged up, they're boxed, and they're sent to usually Miami or wherever they go in the world, right? They're sent to a place, and then they get held in like, your supplier, and then they get sent to your fish store, and then they get sent to your aquarium. So that's a long story for one tiny little fish, but think about what happened during that, right? That fish was caught somewhere in the Amazon, and that fisherman that caught it was paid for it. So imagine if that didn't happen, right? Imagine if that fish was captive raised at a farm somewhere, and they have figured out how to farm cardinal tetras. If that fish was raised at a farm somewhere, that farm gets the money, not the people that live there in the Amazon where the fish came from, right? If you send that money to that farm, then they just kind of expand the farm, and it makes a couple of people really wealthy, right? But if you do this, if you put the money back into the area where the fish came from, they do different things. They send their kids to school. They buy food. They go to the doctor. They do all these things that you take for granted that are really hard to do when you live in a village in the rainforest. So why is that important where that money goes to? This is a photo that I took from a plane on my way to Manaus a couple of years ago. And I was like looking out the window in the plane for a while trying to figure out, what am I looking at? What is that? It's fire. That's the riverbank. You can sort of make out, this is a terrible picture because I took it from a plane at night, right? But you can make out the outline of the riverbank, and it's on fire. So what can you do to make a living in the Amazon? You can do slash and burn farming, you can do timber harvest, you can do gold mining, you can produce cocaine, you can move to the city, you can do all these terrible things that happen in the cities in South America, or you can catch fish. Which sounds better? I want the fish, right? So this is a thing that was put out by the FAO in 1996. In 1996, the export value of ornamental fish was over $200 million. Now, imagine, as a conservation organization like the New England Aquarium or anybody who cares about the environment, imagine if you could take a $200 million grant and put it into the most vulnerable places for environmental exploitation that you can think of. Imagine taking that money and putting it in the places where the forests are being clear-cut to produce, timber or coffee or cattle ranching and things like that, all these environmentally catastrophic things. If you could put $200 million there, imagine the difference that makes, right? That's what's happening with the fish that we buy. When we buy wild-caught ornamental fish from the Amazon, that's what you're doing. You're putting your money into that spot that desperately needs it, right? Because if a person, if you're a family and you live in a place where you don't have money, but you have the forest and you need to feed your family, you're going to do what you need to do, right? You're going to cut down the forest. You're going to, burn it down and do all these things that are maybe not so good for the environment. But if you do that, how many of you have kept cardinal tetras before? Okay. Are they easy to keep? Generally, right? Imagine if you have all that stuff that goes into the water with a gold mine. Imagine, is a cardinal tetra going to live downriver of that? No, right? My experience with them is, if you do everything right, they're great. If you look at them wrong, they die. Right? If you do things that are not good for them, they die. Right? And that includes all of these things. You really can't have healthy, thriving fisheries in areas where you have these environmental catastrophes, right? But if you have something that looks like this, and you go out in your little canoe and you catch them in your little net, right, and you take them home and you sell them, that is a very sustainable, very beneficial thing for the environment. This was one of the greatest nights of my life. These are all Santa Isabella angels, which are my favorite angelfish. They're so beautiful. They have these little red freckles on their backs. They're amazing. And they are just swimming out there, right? Project Piaba does a trip every year where we go out and we investigate the fishery and we try to see where we can best apply our time, our talents, and our money to improve the fishery for everyone and everything. And we went out to this village and we saw all these angelfish, and it was just oh my gosh, I would love to keep these in my tank. Please, please export them, right? So what's new? What does Project Piaba actually do? So again, we're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. We don't buy the fish, we don't sell the fish, we don't do anything with the fish. But what we do is we try to talk to people about this, right? Because again, I asked in the beginning, by a show of hands, what's better, wild-caught fish or captive-raised fish, right? And again, it depends. But in this case, these fish have this huge environmental benefit, right? Keeping these particular fish as opposed to ones that were farmed somewhere has a huge difference. So this is us at Aquatic Experience when it was in Chicago, talking to people and, coloring with kids on the floor and talking to their parents about how the fish that you keep in your home, the choice that you make, right? We've got all these choices in our life. We can choose to buy the coffee that was grown in the shade, or you can buy the coffee that was grown where they clear cut something, right? You choose that. You can buy, if you're talking about fisheries in New England, you can buy a fish that is sustainably caught, or you can buy something that lives for 200 years, like Patagonian toothfish. Please don't eat that, right? Things that are really catastrophic for the environment. So we talk about how those things are different, right? It's no different with your home aquarium fish. So we talk to people, we show people things. We're like, hey, the fish are cool, you probably keep them anyway, but if you get them wild caught from the Amazon, they have this net benefit to the environment, and they create stewardship in these areas, right? We also work with the AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, because public aquarium visitors are, so great to be fish keeper. They're people with time to go to the aquarium, with money to go to the aquarium, who have an interest in fish, right? These are where the future hobbyists are coming from, right? So we're working with a lot of places to build exhibits. This is in Audubon, right? Because people go to the aquarium, I think, a lot and then think, oh, that's really cool. I can't do that at home. That's not true, right? So these fish are beautiful, and you can totally set this up at home, right? This looks like it could be in my living room or in my bathroom or, you know, in my closet where I keep all of my tanks, because there's too many of them for the living room. You know, and there's different things that you can do to educate people in public aquariums to get them thinking about where they get their fish from. Here's our exhibit at the New England Aquarium. I think it's beautiful. It's Blackwater. I love Blackwater. We also are doing a lot of best handling practices. So the fishery is not without its problems. It has a lot of issues. It has a lot of setbacks, right? You can buy your fish from Southeast Asia, and generally they are cheaper that way because they're not being flown from a remote place in the Amazon. Generally they survive better because they've been kept in like little captive pools for their entire lives, and they've been raised at whatever pH you want them in your tank. You don't have to acclimate them from a pH of like 4.5 where they come from in the Rio Negro, really acidic water. So we're working with teams of veterinarians from the University of Oregon and the Hatfield Marine Science Center to problems with the fish health-wise, you know, to make them survive better. And a lot of the things that we found, small changes can actually make a huge difference in the fish. Like, so you know, when you bring your fish home, how you acclimate it, how you take care of it, how you set it up to thrive, basically, has a huge impact on its survival later, right? So a lot of what this is happening, this fishery has existed since about the 1950s. And it hasn't changed much. The way that they catch the fish has not changed much. But the people catch the fish, and then they ship them down the river, and they don't see them again, right? They get paid for their fish, they don't see them. They don't know that it makes a difference if you catch your fish, right? If you're scooping them up out of the water, and you take them out of the water, and they're flip-flopping in the net, right? That's really bad for their slime coat. We know that. You know, you don't handle your fish roughly if you want them to survive well. They don't know that, because they catch them, they put them in these little buckets and they ship them down the river, and then if they die 2 weeks later, they don't even know. They have no idea, right? So we go in and we like look at them. What happens to their slime coat? What kind of parasites do they have? What kind of things are in their stomachs? What's the stomach contents? What do they have? Fungal infections? Are there certain, you know, things that we can treat them with? Can we medicate the fish and help them survive better down the road, right? These are things that the fishermen don't know, and these are small changes that Project Piaba is working on doing. So we did a thing recently after we sent the vets down to look at the stuff and like make recommendations. We started doing this thing called Train the Trainers, which is absolutely, you know, absolutely not appropriate for somebody like me or like Scott or any of the gringos to go down and tell people who have been fishing since the 1950s that the way your granddaddy did it was wrong, right? Not appropriate. And it generally doesn't work like that if you go and try and tell somebody how to do that. So we trained a bunch of Brazilian people who are smart people. They're scientists. They're you know, this is one of my favorite people on earth. He's running for mayor in Barcelos. Really smart kid. And we teach them about fish health and how to handle the fish to help them survive better. And then they go into the villages and talk in a culturally appropriate way of how to make your fish survive better. And then after the people get trained, after they learn about how the way that they handle their fish and stuff can be better, they go out and they talk to the people, and those people join Ornapesco, which is the fishermen's cooperative in Barcelos, and then if you get certified, you get paid more for your fish because you can put that stamp on them saying that they're certified. You know, like how you can get your coffee that's certified fair trade, or like that's, you know, organic or green, or, you know, whatever that certification is, that process that labels those fish makes them worth more. And the fish generally, they survive better when you handle them better. They're caught by professionals, so you can really, you know, do that. Phase 4 of this is assessment. We haven't done this yet. We don't know how much this is improving things, but I can say just, you know, qualitatively that it seems like the fish are coming in better health, that they're surviving better, because the cool thing about, you know, me having a day job at the New England Aquarium is then we, you know, buy Project Piaba fish and we get to see how they work professionally. You know, like we'll put them in tanks, we'll bring them in, and then we put them on exhibit and we're like, oh man, you know, these ones really didn't do so well, or oh man, these ones did great. So I was talking with somebody about pygmy cories, and we're like, oh man, they just didn't do so well. What are some changes that we can make for those particular species, right? Pretty cool. We've also employed Carbon Co., which is its own nonprofit group of people who work with carbon in terms of like climate change and carbon. You know, this is not at all my area of expertise. I'm into fish, and I'm into talking to people about fish. I'll talk all day if you let me, but you won't. But so we have people who are carbon specialists, and they deal with how carbon is locked up in the rainforest and helps prevent climate change, and what the impact is if you lose that particular area of forest, right? If you lose that carbon sink. And we are constantly developing relationships with commercial partners. So we did a lot of work with Seagrass Farms, because one of the things that happened probably about 8 to maybe 10 years ago at this point is Seagrass Farms put out this thing like, hey, we figured out how to breed cardinal tetras. Now you can get captive raised cardinal tetras. And we went, no, that is not good for the environment. Don't do that, please, no, no, no. And so we went and we talked to them, and we're actually really good friends with a lot of the people that work there. And they were like, yeah, you know, we don't want to kill the environment. We want the fish to, you know, to be around in the wild too, not just in our tanks, right? So we talked to them, and they said, you know what, we're gonna transition our cardinal tetra. They spent, you know, decades developing this, and, you know, a whole lot of money into their water systems to like breed cardinal tetras. They were like, you know what, we're going to reallocate this to acclimate wild-caught cardinal tetras, and then we're going to sell that as our product, not the ones that we breed. So that was a win. We're working with a lot of next pet vendors to import Project Piaba fish, because again, it makes a difference where you get them from. You know, a cardinal tetra that you buy from a fish farm does not have the same environmental impact on the area in terms of stewardship and in terms of environmental conservation. So we want to do that. We have a lot of letters of support from a lot of highly respected in the scientific community areas. The Ornamental Fish International, World Bank, FAO, IUCN. We work with people there, and on the freshwater fish specialty groups of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. This is me. Write down my email if you want to talk to me, or we're in the Project Piaba booth over there. We love to talk about fish. We love to talk about sustainable fisheries. We love everything about it. That's me in Brazil. And then I wanted to just show you a bunch of cool pictures of fish, because it's such a cool area that we go to. We run a trip every year too, if you're interested in like really getting involved and you know, seeing everything about the fishery. You know, we go source to sink. We go to the villages where they're catching the fish. We go to the transfer stations where the fish are held. We go to the export facilities where the fish are then sent to importers in the US and then are acclimated and then sent out to the fish stores where you buy them from. So we see all the stuff that's behind the scenes for your fish, and it's really cool. And I was talking to somebody earlier. I think the best part about it was, you know, fish that I've kept for, you know, literally since I was like old enough to keep fish, which started very young for me, and keeping them my whole life, and then like swimming with them, like, right? Like there's, oh my gosh, look, pike cichlids, whoa. And not only, you know, pike cichlids, but pike cichlids that are angry that I'm swimming with them because they've got, you know, a nest full of fry and they're protecting them, and oh my gosh, I got attacked by pike cichlids. How cool is that? Right? They're pulling my hair. That was great. Wood cats, all kinds of really cool fish. This is a barracuda, not the saltwater barracuda, but they call it barracuda. This is at a place called Agua Boa, which was just magical. Chocolate cichlid, piranha. That's an electric eel. This is a bunch of really dumb people. I was in the water too, with a giant electric eel that we found. This was my favorite fish. my favorite Brazilian fish. I had never seen this before I went to Brazil. This is Scolopax. It is the smallest catfish in South America. This fish is in both of these photos, so you can see it. And actually, we were on the trip that I was on. We had the ichthyologist for Brazil was on this trip, and he was like, "Oh man, we might see Scolopax here. This would be so cool if we had Scolopax." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" And then he had one of these, like the big one, right? And we went into this this area in the rainforest, and when I was there, it was like particularly dry, like really, really dry. It was an El Nino year. Everything was dry, but he went to this area that was literally just mud. And he took this thing and he dug it down into the mud, and he came up with like a whole, mud, leaves, bugs, all kinds of stuff that you would expect to find in a mud puddle in Brazil, right? And then he was like kind of sorting through it, and then he goes, "Oh,